Miranda Rikes, thank you so much for coming onto YouTube to talk about our new book. We've just put together the Rapid Novel Blueprint. So one of the things that makes this book particularly unique is that it really shows you how professional writers finish novels fast. And so I'd love to get into it. You have been writing 4 books a year. How do you do it?
Because we have a process. So I have a really collaborative process with my publishers, although I have to say that that collaborative process started with you going back 5, 6 years ago now. So what we do is we create something called a beat sheet. And it's the way that screenwriters work, and that they work in this collaborative manner. So typically, I would come up with an idea, and that idea might just be a paragraph long. And I would send that to my publishers. Then they would say yes or no. Then I would develop that into maybe 2 pages of A4. We send that back. And then we have our initial Zoom call where we start fleshing out the whole book. And that's normally my editor and then one of the senior editors at my publisher's Incubator Books. And that Zoom call was probably a couple of hours, typically that first call. And then after that, I developed this beat sheet. And a beat sheet is essentially a very detailed synopsis. So for instance, let's say there are 30 chapters in my book, and that's typical for me. I tend to have 30 chapters. My books tend to be between 70 and 80,000 words long. And then I would have maybe 3 or 4 beats. So that's little plot points for each chapter. And I would write that out. And this process can take time. Sometimes it goes super fast. Other times it can take weeks and weeks to develop that beat sheet. But I know that for psychological thrillers, I need to have my 3 acts. I need to have act turns, which are basically big things happening at the end of Act 2, at the midpoint, and then again on the turn from Act 2 to Act 3. And that's pretty standard with most commercial fiction or genre fiction. And then eventually, when that beat sheet is written, and it can be 8, 10,000 words long, so it's a big document, I send that to my publishers, and they might come back with some changes, and then they sign me off. And it's only then that I start writing the book. But because I know what I'm writing, I actually find the writing process really fast. So the dialogue plays out in my head, the scenes play out in my head, and I don't get lost in the plot. And I think that's really, really important. Now, as you probably know, well, you definitely know, Emily, but we tend to call writers either plotters or pantsters. And the pantster bit comes from flying by the seat of your pants. And there are many amazing authors out there that simply can't do this process. And they are pantsters. They just like exploring the novel as they go. But without a shadow of a doubt, they will have to do lots of developmental edits. I don't do any developmental edits because we've done all of that before I even start writing. So for me, the process is really fast, and that's how I'm able to write 4 books a year.
And that's exactly what I love about coaching is that you're taking the developmental edit and you're putting it on the front end rather than the back end. And so I think comparing this to the way that, let's say, people traditionally work. So often, if you are submitting to a publisher, with fiction, a traditional top 5 publisher, let's say, your publishers work with you on the front end. But if you're a new author and you're submitting to a publisher, you are going to have to get a lot of developmental editing, which so often means once you get the book published, you have to write it again because you have to switch things around. You have to put things in, take things out. And so it really changes the book. But this developmental edit or this structural edit, which is the beat sheet or the detailed outline, that is where you suss all that out so you know exactly where you're going ahead of time. So in the Rapid Novel Blueprint, you have provided a sample beat sheet from Make Her Pay. And then when I saw that beat sheet, oh my goodness, it was so liberating. This is the final
This is the
book.
book. That's the book that we use as an example. And so what I've done is I have included pretty much the process that I went through with my publishers. So there's the initial blurb, which was essentially the pitch. Then there's the one-page synopsis, which is actually always more than one page because it's really, really difficult doing one-page synopsis. And then I share the whole beat sheet. And what we've done is that Emily, with her coaching hat on, has explained what I have done as an author in that beat sheet. So we've really kind of worked between the two of us, haven't we? Where that explanation I think is absolutely vital. And to be honest, it's kind of very second nature to me now. I've just finished the edits on my 24th psychological thriller. So I don't really think about what I'm doing. So for me, it was fascinating because you've thought that through and you've explained what I've done so that a newbie author will understand everything about that beat sheet.
Exactly. And so actually the book has two different parts with this because you have the example beat sheet. And then I went through and I talked about the inciting incident, the development, the midpoint. And so these are plot points that translate to fantasy, that translate into young adult fiction. And we've defined those different genres and given example hooks for anything you want to write. So any kind of genre fiction or commercial fiction that you want to get into, you can take this beat sheet and really just translate it to your process. And of course, as a coach, this is basically what I do and what I love doing is that we break down the structure and the development of a book. We get it all right on the front end, and then the writers are liberated to go off and just write. Which, and I've shared this, I shared the beat sheet with a few clients right away to get their feedback on it. And I think they too felt so liberated by this process because we sit down to a blank page and then we beat ourselves up because we think, what am I supposed to write? I don't know these characters. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what's going on. And when you can take the time to just really think everything through and summarize before you get into the individual paragraphs of the book, then yes, the process goes so much faster. So
It kind of takes the scariness out of it as well, doesn't it? Because I think,
absolutely.
if you sit down, even me, if I sit down at the beginning and think, oh, I've got to write 75,000 words, that's absolutely terrifying. I mean, how do you even begin? You just know it's going to be so complicated and difficult. But I never think that. I never crossed my mind to how many words I've got to write at the beginning of the book, because that's not the process. I know that I'm starting off with something small, and then I'm creating a structure, and then I'm expanding that as I go along. And actually, I naturally write now at between 70 and 80,000 words. It doesn't tend to be that difficult. Having said that, even after 24 books, I still have my mid-book crisis, and my editor laughs at me. It's the same always. That's confidence in what you're writing. It ebbs and wanes, and then it gets better again. And that's why the collaborative process is so important. I have my editor to support me, but if I didn't have my editor, or prior to having my editor, I had Emily. And it's just, otherwise you just get, even when you know the structure and you know exactly what you're doing, writing can be lonely, and it's just so helpful to have someone just to bounce ideas off.
Exactly. Don't go into it alone. Don't go into the room alone. And this is another interesting point. If you don't do the developmental process up front, and I can't wait to ask you because this is the way screenwriters work. This is why we like
Yes.
movies as much as we like movies, and the reason we like your psychological thrillers as much as we do, because there's a collaborative process to it, which if you're writing the book by yourself and then you're handing it to a developmental editor at the end of the process, you actually get less input because they're taking it and they're doing what they want with it. When you can come to this agreement at the beginning, sometimes if you hire a developmental editor, you might not know them very well. There have been so many cases where people have different visions and they're not working with an editor who understands their book. So getting the coaching or having an editor that you work with at your publisher, it makes the process easier and faster. And so would you describe what it looks like? What are the meetings like when you're getting into this detailed outline, the beat sheet?
So I've worked with my editor, Jan, for quite a few books, and we work in a similar way. So we do go quite fast, but everybody's different. You know, we tend to be quite plot led in the way that we think. Some people are not like that, and I know that there are other editors within incubator books that tend to be more character led than plot led, and it's just slightly different process. But fundamentally, it's the same. So I normally start at the beginning, and I don't worry about the twist at the end until the end. So when let's say I've got my 2 pages and that's been agreed, and so then I will just think, well, what's happening at the beginning of this book? What is the inciting incident? Who are my characters? And I don't do a lot of work on developing my characters. Some people like to do more. I don't necessarily feel the need to do that, but I know that some of your tips for having conversations with your characters are absolutely invaluable. So I do recommend that. You'll find that in the book. And so I will simply just start off with what's happening right at the beginning. And it will just be 3 or 4 sentences per chapter. And then it also depends. There are, of course, many other things that you have to think about when you start, and that, you know, point of view, like number one. So right at the beginning, I will decide, is this written in the first person or the third person? Now, I write all my books in the first person. It's just something that works very well for psychological thrillers, and it's something that I'm comfortable with, but a lot of people don't do that. It's very personal. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. You have to do what's most comfortable for you. And then I will decide who, you know, the voices. So sometimes there will be 2 or 3 narrators, and I will do alternating chapters. Sometimes it will just be from one character's point of view the whole way through. So you do need to establish things like that right at the beginning, because otherwise you can get really confused. And you need to establish whether this is in the present tense or whether this is past and all the rest, and that. So those are sort of the basic things. So I tend to write present tense, first person. So that basically means it's all my characters are I am going out the door right now. Those are my books. It's very simple.
Well, and it's simple for you because you've done it so many times. And so that's why in the book, it's fun to take the paragraphs that you've written, the example of the beat sheet, and then I have little comments that you can use as prompts. How are you going to develop the characters? And in so many ways, plot is character and character is plot. If you're plot led, then basically your characters are making decisions that become turns in the plot. And then that creates I know who your characters are because of the decisions they made, because of the things they do. And so people who are character led, then they will be thinking about, okay, this is a very, Cersei from Game of Thrones type character. And so she's going to be manipulative or things like that. So both sides play upon each other. And I will say that this is a huge advantage of being a plotter rather than a pantser. And that is having the ending in the beat sheet. Because even though you go from the beginning to the end of the beat sheet, there's a lot of architecture in the ending of a psychological thriller. And so to be able to get there, to be able to start the actual writing of the book with the end in mind, then you know exactly what you need to set up, exactly what you need to do. And that is another element of the rapid novel blueprint that makes it go a lot faster. And so once you have your beat sheet, how do you go through the process? Once you have that finished and talking all of these details through with your editor, so you hit upon all of the major points, then how do you go to writing the actual book?
honestly, that's for me the easiest part and the part that I enjoy the most. I mean, I do type very fast. I type as quickly as I think, so that does help. I just find that the voices just play out in my head. So, I mean, I don't have an example of the beat sheet in front of me, but I would just look at that very first thing that happens, that very first plot point, and just write around that. I know what's going to be happening throughout the book. So it's kind of just developing that story. It's creating the setting. It's having the dialogue between my characters. And yeah, it's difficult to know. I mean, I a lot of people are saying, how many words do you write a day? And of course, that is important. And you absolutely need a habit. I mean, I'm a full-time writer. So if I'm not writing, then I'm not working, basically, although I don't see my writing as work. I love doing it. I'm very lucky. So I do tend to write anywhere between 1.5 and my best ever day I think was like 7,000 a day words a day, but typically maybe 2,000-3,000 words a day, and that means I can write a book in 3-4 weeks because I know what I'm writing. I'm not having to sit there and figure out plot twists or figure out where something's gone a bit wrong. Or I remember in one of my very early books, I didn't even know who the baddie was. So basically, I got to the end and then I had to retrofit everything. And that's just not a very good way of doing it. You need, if you have that clarity from the beginning, who your key characters are, what they're going to be doing, then actually the writing process becomes so much easier.
Absolutely. And of course, you're speaking from the perspective of working on your 24th book at this time. And so in the beginning, there is a lot more of that exploring, which is what we've tried to show in the Rapid Novel Blueprint, is that these are the different places that you're going to feel your way through. And having that beat sheet and having that clarity, we've talked about 2 levels of clarity at this point. So knowing what you want, all of those journaling questions are in the Rapid Novel Blueprint book. And then also having the clarity about the plot points, about the outline, then that shows you how to get from the beginning of the book to the end of the book very rapidly. And so as an objective observer and as a coach, what I can see is coming together is what you love to read. What you love to read is kind of an aspect of your own voice. It's the thing that will come most easily to you when you are writing. And then when you have that clarity, you're able to write it quickly. That is what you're able to publish 4 books a year, however many books. And then it's that snowball effect of being able to meet the reader expectations that allows you to make the fortune or the financing of the books. If that's what you want, that's where it all comes to. And so yes, we're going through the different points. You'll get all of the details in the Rapid Novel Blueprint. So I'm excited that your next book is coming out soon. Can you give us a glimpse or anything that's happening with that?
I can. So it's called The House Swap, and it's set between Provence in the south of France and a luxury townhouse in Knightsbridge in London. And it's 2 families who do this house swap and the things that happen when they're doing that. And I do just want to add, it's kind of not a race. I mean, I write a lot of books, and there are people, there are other authors out there who write a lot of books. There's some people that will write one a year. There's some people that will write one every 5 years. It's absolutely fine. There's no pressure. This is just, I think what we're trying to do is, as Emily said, is give you this blueprint that you can find out what works for you, because we're all unique and we all have got different things going on in our lives. And it's just making that writing process easy and enjoyable, and working for everybody individually.
Exactly. So if you've been so many people I talk to have been wanting to get started for years. And so once you get your foot in and you can see the behind the scenes of how books really come together, it makes everything easier. So thank you so much for giving us that behind the scenes, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.